All right, we are up on the Boston Medical Center Rooftop farm. My name is Lindsay Allen. I'm the farm manager here. And today we're going to be talking about container gardening. The how-tos, the what's, questions you might have. We're hoping to show you how to grow food in a really small space in an urban environment. Even if you have no lawn, if you just have a little bit of outdoor space, we're going to show you how to grow some food for yourself or for your family. So I want to just start out by talking about why we'd want to do container farming. For a lot of people in urban spaces, we can't actually grow in the ground in the soil because it's very contaminated. We have a lot of lead in our soils and a lot of other heavy metals. And so unless you get your soil tested, I really don't recommend actually planting food that you're going to eat in the soil unless it gets tested. And so when we plant in containers, we are then farming above or gardening above the ground, and we don't have to worry about a lot of those contaminants that would then be in our food that we're growing. Another reason is it's super flexible. If you only have a stepway down to the sidewalk, you can put a planter on that. If you have a tiny balcony or front or back porch, as long as they get sunlight, you can plant food at your house. And so we here on the Rooftop farm grow in these milk crate systems, which are awesome. They're really flexible. They have handles. You can move them around. They have a liner and then soil. But really you can grow in anything that's going to allow the water to drain out but hold the soil in. And we'll talk a little bit about what plants match to what size pots. But the big consideration for you at your home is going to be the light, like what kind of light you get at where you can actually put plants. And so if you are wanting to grow things like tomatoes or other summer crops like peppers and cucumbers and squash, they need a fair bit of light. Tomato plants need about 8 hours of sunlight. That doesn't need to be 8 hours altogether. That could be, a few hours in the morning and a few hours in the afternoon, as long as at the end of the day they have a full 8 hours of sunlight. But if you have 3 or 4 hours of light, that would be totally enough to be able to grow lettuce or to grow some kale or chard in your yard or on your front porch. Another thing to just think about is what size pots we have. Things like tomatoes, peppers, plants that are in the ground longer, they're going to want something with a deeper root area, as opposed to a pot like this, which is a lot smaller and doesn't have as much root space. So for a pot like this, growing lettuce would be great in here. Maybe some of your different herbs like a mint, thyme, parsley, things that are shallower rooted would be good in here, but not some of your bigger plants that you're going to be harvesting for a long time. And so I'm going to be planting and show you a few different arrangements in this milk crate here. Don't overcrowd your plants. I can't emphasize that enough, because what that does is below ground they're competing for nutrients, their roots are intertwining, and you're going to get a lot less of a yield and have pretty unhappy plants. And so if you are wanting to grow this is kale, this is a variety of red Russian kale. If you're wanting to grow kale, collard greens, or Swiss chard, you're going to plant them in the exact way that I'm planting these two kales right now. This is one little pack, and it happens to have 2 plants in it. And so what I'm going to do, this is a compostable container. I'm kind of going to peel it off, because I find that they'll actually just grow better if you either just rip it a little bit or peel parts of it off. And then I'm just going to split these right down the middle, which feels sometimes a little violent, but they're going to totally be fine. So I have my 2 kale plants here. You either want to plant 1 kale right in the middle or 2 on either side. And so what that looks like is just digging a little bit of a hole, and then I want to bury it right to the base of where the leaves start to come off. And this kale's been in its pot for a while, so I'm going to take off some of these yellow leaves. That just means it's wanting some nutrients and to be transplanted. So I'm popping this kale in right here. It's really simple. You're just digging one little hole, kind of pulling the soil aside, popping that in there, and then making soil contact, pushing it down around there, and voila, that's like a good amount of plants for this kind of space. Now if I was planting a kale in here, I would just do 1 kale right in the middle of here and nothing else, because they're a lot smaller. It needs that full root space in there. Here we have a red Russian kale, which is the variety of kale we just planted, and it is ready to harvest. And what you want to do is you're always harvesting from the outside of the plant, because the new leaves grow from the center, and it's really just a down and kind of twist to the side motion. And then these leaves that are kind of medium sized here in the next week will be, get to be really large and be ready to harvest. So always pulling from the outside kind of down and out, and this will keep going. You'll be harvesting from 2 to 3 months off of this just one plant. So tomatoes, as you probably know, they get really big. Like this plant's going to get probably about this big. So all I'm going to be putting in is 1 tomato plant, and they like to be planted really deep, like 1/2 to 2/3 of the way up its stem wants to be buried. I literally am just pulling the soil up, digging a deep hole in there. I pinched off a few of those first leaves, and then I'm popping it right in there, pushing down, and my tomato plant, done. So don't be tempted to fill this space around it. Tomato plant, one and done. Again, these are too small for a tomato plant. You won't get hardly any tomatoes from that. They'll take over way too quickly. I think that a great place to start if it's your first time gardening is with herbs. Most herbs are really forgiving. They oftentimes don't need as much water. And so I have a few different herb plants here. These are sage starts. I have some thyme here as well, and then parsley. And what I love to do with a spot like this is actually put a few different kinds of herbs so I can come out and harvest, for my pasta or whatever I'm going to be cooking, a few different herbs. And so in this small of a container, you could probably put 4 to 5 different plants, and they'll really fill this space. But you could also just put 3, and they will also fill this space. And so again, with most plants, you're just kind of covering, besides tomatoes, you're just going right to the base of this plant here. So this is a little start, and I'm just popping it right in on both sides. These are 2 little sage plants that are going to get big. They'll get really big. Now these thyme, I could put 1 thyme plant in here, and by the end of the season it would have taken over this whole thing. But in order to get more thyme more quickly, I'm going to put in a few of them. So I'm going to put a thyme over here in the corners here, and because I really like parsley, I'm going to pop one right in the middle. That parsley is going to get really big, but with parsley I can just come and I can cut the whole thing down and it will regrow. And so these thymes can they'll start to grow over the sides here, which is really nice. So plants that are sensitive to sunlight and heat, such as lettuce or arugula and spinach, if they get too hot and too much sunlight, they will go to seed. So it's called bolting. So instead of actually putting effort into making that nice lettuce head for you, they'll go straight to flower, because they're basically like, I'm about to die, it's too hot, let me reproduce. So tomatoes, oftentimes I like to grow in the shade of other crops. So if I had a big tomato plant here, I'd actually want to put that so it's giving my my lettuce a little bit of shade and protection from the sun. And with these lettuce, anything that heads like a lettuce or cabbage, I don't really want to get any soil on top of here, so I'm just burying it right to the base of it, but not going too high. And I usually, for this size crate, I would only put 4 lettuce heads, and those will head up nicely, and they'll be ready to harvest in about like 5 weeks or so. All right, so you can see here we have 4 lettuce heads, just like the ones we planted here, and they've fully occupied this entire milk crate. And so what I like to do in this situation is first take one of them, I'm going to kind of tilt it to the side, and what I'll do is I'll take this out, and that's going to allow a little bit more space for these to grow, and then next week I'll come back and harvest these. And so what I do is I kind of tilt it to the side, and then I make a cut right at the base of it. And so what I get is this nice big beautiful head of lettuce, and see how this opens up, it gets some air in there and allows some more space for these plants to grow bigger. You'll see where I just cut the lettuce. I usually like to do a little cut in it so that it won't regrow, because it'll put out little leaves, but it won't actually form a nice big head again that's tasty, and that way it's not taking nutrients out of the soil. A really cheap, affordable way to get lots of awesome plants is, I just got these at Trader Joe's for $1.99. You can go to a lot of grocery stores and they'll sell potted herbs, and they've literally put, like, it looks like 10 plants in one pot. And so what you can do is actually separate them out, and then you have got 10 plants for the price of 1. Again, it feels a little bit vicious, like pulling apart the roots, but we can kind of separate out these plants, and you end up with all these individual plants here. And so these basils, again, very similar to the lettuce, I just kind of pop them in each corner here, and they're going to get nice and full, and you can continually harvest from basil plants. You can just kind of keep pinching the leaves off, and then they'll keep regrowing. when I'm thinking of what to put in a container is think of plants that you can kind of continually harvest from, or things like lettuce where it's really quick and I can harvest that head of lettuce and then I can plant another head right in there. But I don't want to do things like, I really wouldn't put like a broccoli plant in here or cabbage, because it's basically going to sit here for 2 months or a month and a half. I'll harvest it and then it'll be done. As opposed to my kale plant where I can actually continually harvest from that, or my tomatoes where I'll be harvesting for like a month to 2 months off of one plant there. All right, so we just planted some basil, so I wanted to show you, this is still pretty young, but I'll just show you the proper way to harvest basil so that you can get a lot of continual harvest from it. You want to always pinch. If we come in and look here, we can see these tiny little leaves here that are starting to form. We want to pinch right above those. You can take the top off. And then we can harvest these side leaves like this by just simply pinching, and then what will happen is these are going to get turned into large leaves just like this and grow here. So same with this one, I would pinch these outer leaves but leave these two here. Now you don't want to take all the leaves off because it still needs to be able to photosynthesize, so I'm going to leave a few leaves on here, and what will happen is these will grow out, and if you always harvest right above them at the joint, you're going to be able to continually harvest from this plant for the whole season. When you're thinking about watering, if the soil looks dry, it's probably dry, but just stick your finger, like what I do is I just stick it a few, kind of an inch or two in the soil, and if it's dry down there, then water your plant. The best time of day is like in the morning to water. Since we're farming or gardening right above the ground, it dries out because of the wind, it dries out a lot more easily. So if you have a little bit of mulch like straw or wood chips, you could put that on the top and that'll help like not lose as much water to evaporation. All right, well, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you learned a few things and are feeling a little bit more confident on how to plant in some containers at your house and start to grow your own food. Feel free to leave some comments here and I'll do my best to answer your gardening questions. And I wish you luck on this journey.